Hello, I'm Richard Kauntze, Chief Executive of the British Council for Offices, the BCO, and welcome to episode 4 in our series of interviews we call The Office Briefing. Now, today's interview comes from the developer's perspective, and where better to turn than one of the leading practitioners in the field, and that's Gerald Kaye.
Good morning, Richard. Great to be on your show.
Well, thank you, Gerald. That's very kind, and it's a great pleasure to have you with us. I'm very grateful to you for spending some time. For those who may not know, let me tell you a little bit about Gerald. He started off at Knight Frank and Rutley, as was, for those of us old enough to remember it in that incarnation. But he was snapped up 4 years later by one of his clients, London and Edinburgh Trust, where his first major project was 51 Eastcheap in the City of London. After a change in ownership at LET, Gerald moved to Brussels for a few years, but was back in London in 1994, where he joined Helical, or Helical Bar as it was then, as development director, working alongside the industry legend Mike Slade. And that was before, of course, Gerald became an industry legend in his own right. Now, the rest, as they say, is history. And in BCO terms, Gerald has won pretty much all of the prizes, elected to the board of management at a very young age. Gerald's also been a national awards judge, was president of the BCO in 2010-11, and in 2019 won the BCO's highest honour, our President's Award. So welcome again, Gerald. Very, very good to have you with us. I'll get straight to questions, if I may. And my first theme is what we might call the office as a concept. And over the last year, while most offices have been empty, you've been one of their most vocal supporters. So why do you think, Gerald, that offices are so crucial for business and the economy?
The office is absolutely vital for business and the economy. It's people being together. It's sparking ideas off each other. It's getting to know people well, building trust, building those relationships, whether they're internal or external. It's about learning the corporate culture, how things are done. I think we've seen over the last year, obviously last March, we had to go on this sort of enforced experiment. I think a good analogy is it's a bit like those jets that, particularly today, beautiful blue sky out there. And if there were any jets, there are not many around at the moment, but if there were any jets, there'd be that sort of white trail coming out of the back of them. And you watch it and it's very closely formed. But then gradually, as the jet gets further away, that cloud, that stream dissipates. And I think that's what's happening, in that, you know, we all had to work from home, and it's becoming more and more difficult for those that are still working from home. I'm pleased to say that I'm back in our office, and very much all the team are here as well. We function so much better being together, being able to collaborate. Working from home, it takes a lot longer to do it. Mistakes happen that wouldn't happen if we were all in the office. You know, the wrong document gets sent out, or somebody hasn't checked something properly. So I think it's a vital place.
I think that's absolutely right, Gerald, and I couldn't agree more. And it sort of leads me on neatly to my next theme, because I think this is where it perhaps becomes slightly nuanced. And that's, I've called it broadly what might happen next, because as you say, we've gone through this extraordinary experiment, this global experiment of working from home, and a false one really, as those who saw the interview with Rory Sutherland the other week may have picked up, that we wouldn't consciously have gone to such an extreme position where the whole world is working from home, from pretty much all having been in the office. But looking at what might happen next, unsurprisingly, we both believe passionately in the future of the office as a concept. But my view is that the way many businesses will want to use their offices will change, with, of course, hybrid working being the current phrase of the moment. But do you think that's right, Gerald? Or will there simply be a return to the pre-pandemic working model?
Everything changes. And I think back to when I first started work at Knight Frank Rutley, and one didn't have a mobile phone, one didn't have a computer. And when one went on holiday, one spent sort of 2 days before it dictating a long holiday note to your colleagues so that they knew what to do. If Mr. Kauntze telephoned on Monday about such and such, they could give you a response because they could. And if that doesn't happen anymore because we all tend to work from wherever we are. So I think there's agile working, but I'm not sure this concept that people are going to be working from home 2 or 3 days a week is really going to stick. And I think corporate Britain, or some of corporate Britain, are about to make a massive mistake, which will play out over time. We've had HR departments who have surveyed all the staff, and I think it's always wrong to change strategy in the middle of a crisis. So they've surveyed the staff of these particularly sort of big organizations, and surprise, surprise, some of these staff have not been in an office for over a year. So they are being asked, do you want to carry on working from home some or all of the time? And not surprisingly, a lot of them are saying, yeah, it's like a good idea. I quite enjoy working from home because I get paid the same. I don't have to get up so early. If I haven't got anything to do, I can sort of sneak off and, take the dog for a walk or do the gardening or pop down to the shops or meet my mates in the sitting outside in the pub. I think the time for companies to reset their strategy is when everybody has been back in the office and they've seen how it works. And so I think, and there's some businesses are saying, David Solomon, Chief Executive of Goldman Sachs, saying, I want everybody back in the office. And others are going for a different approach. Google have said they want all of their staff to be within commuting distance, which I think was a bit of a change of tune from where they were a year ago. Amazon are trying to get their staff back. You're seeing particularly some of the banks, HSBC, they're in the press again this morning. They've got loads of people who are going to be working from home, and other organizations like that have said the same. Now, are they using COVID as a bit of a smokescreen for reducing headcounts in their businesses that are rapidly changing? So I think people will work with greater agility. A couple of our team today, they've got appointments they have in the middle of the day at home, and so they're working from home today because that's right, that we give them that flexibility, that ability to do that. But to do it the whole time, and if you think the whole point of the office is everybody is there together. So if half of them aren't there because they're working from home, it rather destroys the point of everybody being together.
I think you're absolutely right, Gerald. And it is interesting. The phrase agility, I think, is right. And I think one thing that interests me, and you mentioned that when you're at Knight Frank and Rutley, as was, and I was starting in my career, it was either the office or nothing, because there was no way of communicating with your colleagues or anyone else sensibly when you weren't in the office. That was the only place that you could, productively work. Technology has destroyed that. So I think greater agility is sensible, but it has to be nuanced. But fundamentally, we are social beings, and we just like to be with other people. And this bizarre experiment is so extreme. I just can't believe that any sensible business would want to lurch from one solid position to another, and it must look at something more nuanced and flexible. I'll move on, if I may, Gerald, to my next theme, which is another one of your passions, which is the office in the city, or perhaps more broadly, the office in cities. And Helical is a business which is anchored around developing in offices in two of our great cities, London and Manchester. And reflecting that, you've spoken frequently on the role of the office in city life. So why is it, Gerald, that you think that connection is so crucial?
I've been, as you can probably gather from what I've said, I've been in the office as much as I can be over the last year, and we had our full year results we prepared at the end of May last year. So we found doing that remotely was just not possible. So we got the core team were back in the office May last year to produce the results, and I've tried to be in the office as much as possible since then. And I would stress we are in the real estate business. We live and breathe real estate, and you've got to see it, and you've got to build it. You've got to be able to touch it. If you've got a project on site, you've got to go and see it and check it's being done properly. And if the client doesn't show up, what's the motivation for the contractor and the rest of the team? So I've been around in London a lot, and I've observed what's been going on. And I've got a photograph I took must have been the end of May last year, looking down Oxford Street at 11 o'clock in the morning. And I promise you, there is not a vehicle or a person in sight. There was nobody around. And of course, you go there now because the shops opened last Monday, and it was completely rammed last Monday. It's been really busy since. But what I found so frustrating at the summer when COVID had all but disappeared was that so few people had actually gone back to the office. And of course, there was a lot of economic activity involved in going to the office, because if you're like me, you get in the car and you drive to the station. So somebody's sort of paying for you're generating economic activity. As petrol goes in the car, pay for the car park, buy a train ticket, get out at the other end, perhaps go on the underground. You may have bought a newspaper, or perhaps one buys it online now, but you certainly bought a cup of coffee or something to eat if you haven't had breakfast at home. You get to the office, you've actually generated quite a lot of economic activity just for the mere fact of going to the office. And then in the office, you're going to be going out at lunchtime, and you might go shopping, and then in the evening you might go out for a drink, and you might go out for dinner. So again, there's a load more economic activity. And walking around the city last summer, there was one particular thing. We were going to, we were in Fenchurch Street, and the biggest crowd was a large group of Japanese tourists who were queuing to go into 20 Fenchurch Street to go up to the viewing gallery at the top. But just opposite that, just sort of Lime Street around Lloyd's, there was a chap sitting in his barber's shop, and there was nobody there, and nobody was going to go there because those Japanese tourists weren't going to have their haircut, and I felt like going into his kiosk and saying, look, here's 20 quid because you're not earning anything here. Why don't you go to the pub and watch the test match? Because you'll have more fun doing that than sitting here on your own. And I just felt so sorry for those people that have got those businesses and nobody was there supporting them. Now, when everybody goes back to work in that area in a few weeks' time, will he still be there? Mm. He may be, but he may have just packed it in, because what's the point? He hasn't been able to cut anybody's hair for however long. Nobody's been there. And you see that happening across the whole of central London. Of course, central London is particularly badly hit because the West End is heavily dependent upon tourists, and there are not many of them at the moment. And then it's heavily dependent upon the office workers, and particularly in the City of London itself. So I think it's a vital part of economic activity. Now, some could say, okay, well, the money's being spent somewhere else instead, but not the full extent. If you look at the way household savings have increased enormously over the last year, and that's mainly office workers who haven't been spending money. And of course, this pandemic has hit, it hasn't hit the whole economy, it's really hit very hard, particularly the young who work in these hospitality industries and in retail and so on.
It is, you're absolutely right, Gerald. It is shocking. When I started going back to the office last summer, there were so many things that shocked me. I mean, we have a very similar pattern, and I drive to a very busy commuter station where, when we first moved to this part of the world, I was told there was a 7-year waiting list for a car parking ticket. And you know, there's this brilliant guy who does the coffee stall at the station, and you know, his business has been decimated. You know, he had virtually no customers. The trains were completely empty. But when I got to the city, and you know, having worked in the City of London for over 20 years, and the BC office in Leadenhall Street, it was extraordinary. I mean, it was like the place had been hit by a neutron bomb. And I was, my first day back, my wife asked me what was wrong with me. And it was the sheer shock. I had never seen the city like it. It was absolutely decimated. And even as people started to drift back, it was still very, very, very quiet, extraordinarily quiet. And, you know, what you know, many would regard as the world's greatest financial hub, you know, looked as if it had been, you know, it was just totally empty. And the ancillary spend, the anchor, the role that the office plays as the anchor for economic activity is absolutely crucial. And you know, I think, you know, that you play with that, you know, there's a great danger in playing with that, because the role that London in particular plays, all of the great cities, but London as the motor of the economy as well is huge. But let's move on, because I want to turn to opportunity, because if there's one word that developers always love, it's opportunity, Gerald. So now the retail sector, and we touched upon that a bit in the last question, but the retail sector has obviously been hit terribly hard by the pandemic, but was undoubtedly heavily oversupplied with space before coronavirus struck. I think we'd all accept that. IWG, the flexible working operator, which of course includes Regis amongst its brands, has recently reported as planning to turn swathes of shops into offices. And John Lewis and Marks and Spencer have also reported as planning to convert much of their flagship stores into office space. So do you think that this will be a broader trend, and perhaps illustrates that the office is very much here to stay, albeit in ever-changing forms?
Richard, I'm convinced the office will be here to stay. We're all in competitive businesses. I believe that the businesses that will be the most successful will be those that have their teams together, that can collaborate, they can bounce ideas off each other, they can build those relationships internally, externally, and so on. So I think the office will be here to stay. And I think once the companies that aren't making as much use of the office as I mentioned Goldman Sachs earlier, they will see that their results are suffering, because they are losing so many of those vital things that happen in an office. So they will suddenly work out, hold on a second, why is this happening? Let's get back to the office. So I think it will change. I think with retail, what escaped most people was that when you drive up and down the motorway, all of those massive massive warehouses you see being built, they're not warehouses, they're shopping centres. But you couldn't drive up to them and say, can I have a can of baked beans? But you go to them virtually. So if anybody had worked out how much retail sales space had increased, and that's just not square foot, because those warehouses are massive, so they're cubes as well. You know, they've got about 12 floors in them if you think of it like that. I mean, that's what happened to the retail business. And nobody's quantified it, but there must have been a doubling of retail space. And where is it more efficient to sell from? There are just far too many shops in the high street. There's got to be a massive repurposing. So the amount of office space hasn't increased like that. And yeah, some shops might become, you've got this new Class E, I think it's called, isn't it? Which means that you can use retail for offices and so on. So that's good, I think. So hopefully the most economic use will come in. I'm not sure, it's quite, I mean, you can turn an office building or into a residential building, and you know, it's happened vice versa. If you look around Mayfair, you know, they were houses originally, they were offices, and now many have gone back to being houses over the centuries. Shopping centres, quite tricky to do something else with them. Maybe they become, you know, Amazon sort of fulfillment centres or something. So I think there's a lot has got to happen there.
They will absolutely have to be repurposed. I think the excessive supply on the high street, it's not just going to disappear. And I think sensible conversion, yes, some to residential, as you say, Gerald. But I think there is an opportunity for office development. And I was particularly struck by the John Lewis and Marks and Spencer statements on their Oxford Street flagship stores as to their plans to both businesses, a large chunk of those developments into offices, which is very interesting. I'm going to move on, Joel, because I'm conscious of time as always, and the next theme is a very, very important one, and one I know you've spoken about recently, and it's a subject that many commentators have said recently, when the pandemic is done and dusted, will dwarf coronavirus in its importance, and that's carbon and climate change. And in a recent article, you wrote that Helical will shortly be launching a new guide on designing for net zero. So why do you think this is so important? And what more must the office sector do to reduce the environmental impact of its product?
There is climate change going on. We've got to do what we can to counteract that by reducing our carbon footprint. Buildings take a huge amount of carbon in their construction, in their refurbishment, and in their use. We must all do our bit to help, and we have to keep improving what we do. Over the years, we've been doing that, and we are now the most recent project, or the project we have on site at the moment, 33 Charterhouse Street, is BREEAM Outstanding. It's the first commercial building to be awarded the 2018 BREEAM Outstanding. The BREEAM, because people say our building is BREEAM this or BREEAM that, but the standard BREEAM set changes every few years. So a lot of people are working off the 2014 standard, which is much easier to achieve than the new one, 2018. Rightly, they increase it. So I think BREEAM should perhaps be a bit more careful with people as to how that is used. So anyway, we're appointing a carbon champion on each scheme, and it's their job to work with the whole design team to minimize carbon throughout the process. And we'll be doing that. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to minimize the amount of carbon throughout the process of what we do. And we're not, I mean, the analogy I use, it's sort of it's all right to smoke 40 cigarettes a day, providing you run around the block 5 times. But actually, you're far better not smoking the 40 cigarettes, aren't you?
Indeed.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to minimize the bad stuff and maximize the good stuff.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And I think seeing these things in the round is hugely important. A very interesting point about the changing standards, as you say, Gerald, and comparing apples with apples as to what a building apps is. But, you know, I couldn't agree more. You know, our world has to do more. It must. It has a huge responsibility to the planet and future generations.
And there's this carbon offsetting, so you can sort of go and pay to absolve your sins. And I think you'll be very careful how one is doing that, and how much the money actually gets to the end target and doesn't get sort of taken out by all the intermediaries between you and what's happening somewhere else around the world.
I agree, and we've seen a lot of that in business travel, for example, and you know, we the BCO have done that. But I think, you know, there will be a reflection on this, and something that's come out in earlier interviews. I think a lasting change of the pandemic and the climate change emergency will be businesses looking at business travel, and where there will be a revolution. I think is the sort of thing we're doing now, whereas you and I would have you know, got on aeroplanes to go for short meetings. I think that will change. But I'm going to move on because we're almost out of time, Gerald. So I come to my last question and theme, and I've called this a touch of magic. And who amongst us doesn't like a bit of magic every now and then, not least property developers? So while it's obviously impossible to define scientifically, what do you think is the magic ingredient that makes for a truly outstanding office development?
Hard work.
Very well put.
The more you put into something, the more you get out of it. And you need to have a talented design team around you. And there's some great architects, great consultants out there, engineers and so on, who, I mean, I likened our role as a developer previously to being the conductor of the orchestra. You know, we get to pick the tune, but everybody else is responsible for playing it, and we've just got to sort of synchronize it all. And that's what we do. And we got some great people that in the industry we work with. And you've got to keep pushing it, and you've got to keep looking at how you can improve what you did last time. What did you do wrong, or what has somebody else done wrong, and how can we get that right? And it's continually evolving. I mean, this is the thing I love about what I do, what we do, is it's different. Every day is different. Every building is different, and every building, we were just talking about carbon, but every building should be more sustainable than the last one. And every building should be a better experience for the tenant. And we're introducing now technology into buildings. And if you can control the building more tightly, then you probably need less. You can make the plant more efficient. So it goes back to the carbon point.
No, I agree. I like your point about hard work, Gerald. Absolutely, nothing comes easy in life, and you know, hard work makes all the difference. It is interesting when to me, it's the fundamental it's a place where people absolutely want to be, and the test is when it lasts. And there are some, we've all seen them all over the world, magic buildings or magic projects, and there's something about them. I mean, one that it struck me when I first saw it many years ago, and every time, the Rockefeller Center in New York, and it's got that extraordinary mix. And again, you know, the passion of the developer. Everyone said Rockefeller was mad to do it, you know, in the depths of a recession. Why do this? And yet all these decades later, you've got this extraordinary mix. It's a place where people want to be. Beautiful architecture, you know, amazing offices, shops, you know, it works. It all comes together. Very, very clever.
Richard, you've got to have buildings with good bones. So that the Rockefeller Center, I mean, I imagine it looks pretty much the same externally as it always has. and it has good bones. You can keep reusing it.
Absolutely.
In New York, just before COVID started, I was in New York and went into the Chrysler building, which is 90 years old now. And it's fantastic. It looks great from the outside, and you can keep, it's been redone. And that's what we should be doing today. We should be providing buildings that our successors in 20, 40, 50 years time can sort of take it a bit, you know, the clothes off the body, but the body is still intact. It's still good.
I agree. When you get the fundamentals right and they last, I mean, looking closer to home, a building I like very much is Bracken House in the city, which has been reinvented several times. And it was fundamentally a very, very sound building that has been repurposed brilliantly. And of course, the FT back there, their original home in the Bracken era. And we could go on, Gerald, but sadly we are out of time. But it's been a huge pleasure, fascinating chat. I'm very, very grateful to you for spending some time with me today. So thank you, Gerald.
Well, thank you, Richard, and I hope your listeners find it interesting.
And thank you very much again. That's all we have time for this episode, but until next time, from Gerald and from me, thank you very much and goodbye.